Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the first in-person meeting of the Pension Subcommittee in 2 years. This is pretty exciting. And I think everybody has their coffee and we're ready to go. I'd first like to welcome Martin Novin and Ann Gothard from the system for being here as always. Today we're going to hear 6 bills, and I will change the order slightly, and then we are going to discuss 4 bills. Mr. Chair, we are moving you up to first, so we're going to hear Senate Bill 801, then Senate Bill 417, Senate Bill 566, Senate Bill 727, Senate Bill 739, and then Senate Bill 822. So with that, Mr. Chair, take it away. Senate Bill 801, State Health Plan, Chesapeake Bay Commission retirees.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'll be very quick. So, the Chesapeake Bay Commission is a very tiny operation from a personnel standpoint. There are 3 people who work there. This issue came to me because our executive director, who's incredible, has been there for decades. And when she came on board, she very much believed that she would have a retirement and retirement health benefits. It's come to pass that after these decades later, it's pretty clear that she was not eligible for the health care benefits. And we get these all the time, as you know. But I don't even want to go down that route in terms of arguing whether she was told the right thing or not the right thing along the way. The bottom line is this small little office that packs a huge punch for the Chesapeake Bay and all the things that we care about around the environment deserves retiree health. And those 3 members of the staff deserve that. That's what this bill does. I think that's pretty much it in a nutshell.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for the chair? Yep. Oh, I really can't see you. Okay, yes. Senator Griffith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick one, and thank you, Mr. Chair, for the bill presentation. So were these employees receiving health care during their employment and just not getting enrolled in the retiree program?
So the interesting thing that's happened over the years is that the bulk of the employees, I suppose, essentially the other 2 other than the executive director, who've come along over the years, actually have come from other agencies, from DNR, and so they came with the opportunity to get their health care after their retirement because of other service. But of course, clearly with our executive director who's been there so long, didn't come from anywhere else, and who knows who will be in these positions in years to come. But seems to me that the institution of this little mighty little commission deserves this benefit.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. All right, seeing no other questions.
Thank you.
That was painless. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, next up, Senate Bill 417, Senator Feldman. State Employee and Retiree Health and Welfare Benefits Program, eligibility for enrollment and participation, Independent Agency Health Insurance Option Act. You win longest title of the day, Senator.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. So during the interim, I served on the STAR Commission, chaired by former B&T member Andy Serafini, and we learned a lot on that commission about our quasi-state agencies. And so we're very fortunate, Maryland, obviously, to have a very strong health care program for our state employees. It includes medical, prescription, and dental plans. So all Senate Bill 417 does, it simply seeks to extend the option to obtain state health care coverage for 3 of Maryland's quasi-state entities: the Maryland Agricultural and Resource-Based Industry Development Corporation, also known as MARBIDCO, the Maryland Clean Energy Center, and the Bainbridge Development Corporation. It's good for them because it's cheaper for them to get their folks in there. It doesn't cost the state anything because under this proposal, those entities are going to use their revenues to pay for the employer portion. So just the 3 entities. MARBIDCO is quasi-public economic development organization that was chartered by the state to promote Maryland's farm, forestry, and seafood business. The Clean Energy Center was established through legislation here in the General Assembly in 2008 to promote economic growth and technology in the clean energy sector. And then finally, Bainbridge Development Corporation was established in 1999 by this legislature to develop the former Bainbridge Naval Training Center in Cecil County. All three of them are here behind me. I think Senator Jackson had a question for at least about one of the entities, but they can explain. And finally, there is a process in place. The bill requires that the Secretary of Budget Management determine whether or not these three entities are eligible to enroll. There's an eligibility requirement, and you can look at the DBM testimony. It sort of puts that out there. It has to figure out if there's a risk to the definition of a government plan. Does adding these three put that at risk under our federal ERISA plans and laws? There's IRS criteria for all that. If DBM deems these three entities eligible to participate, the entities would choose to enroll in the program. There are provisions which mirror those in place already for other satellite organizations that we've already allowed to participate. And again, the fiscal note specifically makes the point on all that. They pay the state the total costs for the employees' participation and determine the extent to which they will subsidize participation of employees. So there is one amendment, Madam Chair, through discussions, and you'll see this in the DBM testimony. I would like to proffer an amendment that will extend the time frame for DBM to make that eligibility determination from the 30 days of the effective date, which is in the bill, July 1, 2022, to 60 days from the effective date. So it goes from 30 to 60. That's their ask in their testimony. And with that one amendment, I'd ask for a favorable. And if there are any questions about the three entities and the nature of the three entities, we've got three witnesses behind me. I might defer to those folks.
Okay.
So,
Looks like I have Senator Jackson first and then Senator Griffith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Senator, for this bill and your presentation. I guess my question is, I'm familiar with Marbidco and MCEC. Bainbridge, I'm wondering if the establishment of Bainbridge and their partnership with the state of Maryland, is that a finite period of time? So the clean energy folks and Marbidco is something we created. So I know you all have, that Bainbridge dealt with the facility up in Cecil County, but once that facility is done, are they still going to be around, or are they moving on?
I'll defer to my witness directly.
Thank you.
She's right behind me, and I'll let her answer that truthfully. Okay. I think that'd be the best way to respond to that.
Thank you.
Senator Jackson, do you mind if we?
I mean, she's here, or you can wait till the three panelists come up.
Let's wait for the three panels, because I imagine there'll be more questions on that.
Okay.
Senator, if that's okay. Senator
Yep.
Griffith?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We're just on this side not able to find the DBM testimony that was referenced on the
Okay.
system, and don't know if there are paper copies in the room, or if we can
That
get a
is an
copy of
excellent question. I don't have it on my floor system either. Philip, any idea?
I have
Well-
I have a hard copy I can give to council, you know, if you want to make copies,
That'll
I have
work.
one
Yep.
here, so,
Thank you.
sure.
Thank you, Senator. Okay, I have three witnesses, Catherine Magruder, Steve McHenry, and Steve Cassard. Oh, okay. Okay. And you can start in whichever order you would like.
Good morning, Madam Chair. For the record, Steve McHenry, representing Marbidco. It's a pleasure to be before you this morning. We're here in support of Senate Bill 417. Certainly want to thank Senator Feldman for his leadership and sponsorship on this issue. Senator Feldman has done a superb job in explaining the bill. The bill enables the three agencies before you to participate in the state's health insurance program if our boards of directors so decline to want to do that, and I suspect they will. And just want to point out that there are more than a dozen quasi-public instrumentalities of the state that are authorized under statute to participate in the state's health insurance program. 8 of them do, including 3 of our rural tri-county councils, the Northeast Waste Development Authority, Maryland Environmental Service, and a few others. So this just puts us in line with them. As you heard from the sponsor, DBM has to do an analysis as to whether we are fully a governmental entity under IRS rules. We believe at Marbidco that we are. I'm sure the others do as well. So be happy to take any questions.
Okay.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Thank you for hearing from us this morning. I'm Kathy Magruder, Executive Director of the Maryland Clean Energy Center, here in support of Senate Bill 417. I too want to thank Senator Feldman and just quickly make a couple points because I know you all are very busy. This is a competitive advantage for MCEC to be able to offer healthcare in this marketplace where employment is so competitive. We have done our research on cost. If we are able to participate in the state plan, it's almost a 100% cost savings. It will double if we have to go through a private vendor to get similar coverage because we're such a small agency, we're such a small entity. And so the buying power of the state comes into play here. And then third, we just think it's fair. If there are other instrumentalities who do have access to this benefit, we would like to be able to benefit from it as well.
Okay.
Again, I urge your favorable support for Senate Bill 417.
Thank you. Good morning, Madam Chair. My name is Tony Sprinkle. I am the Executive Director of the Bainbridge Development Corporation. I echo the appreciation of a focus on this bill, and I agree with Steve and Kathy on the rationale. It would be a wonderful benefit. BDC is a very small entity. We only have 2 employees. We are created by the state, but receive no funding from the state. We are funded completely privately by our development team, and our employee handbook does not guarantee our employees any benefits whatsoever due to the cost. Because we are such a small entity, we cannot participate in group plans. So that unfortunately leaves any of our employees to fend for themselves on the private marketplace, which, as we all know, has a very lofty price tag and not many options. So I think this is a wonderful opportunity for our employees who are serving the state in their role, and it does not, as Senator Feldman said, it is not a cost on behalf of the state. Each entity would handle their contribution individually. I'm happy to answer any questions, and I would appreciate a favorable recommendation. Thank you, Ms. Sprinkle. Senator Jackson and then Senator McCray.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Sprinkle. Question for you. I know you guys were brought on by the state, and I understand the project that you all are involved in up in Cecil County. Is that the only project you're involved in the state? I'm very familiar with Marbidco and with MCEC, and I guess in determining this or to satisfy my questions, I'm wondering, when you were brought on, if the project you're involved in now is the first project, and if there are any other projects that you're looking to do?
Yes, so the BDC was created as a sole purpose entity for the redevelopment of the 1,200-acre former Naval Training Center at Bainbridge. That is our guiding mission. So it is, if we do our job, we will go out of business. There is a potential, ultimately, it would come down to the town, county, and state governmental entities if they would like to recraft the mission and have the BDC continue to serve the local community in some form of fashion as a local redevelopment authority. But as the statute stands, our sole mission is to redevelop the Bainbridge site. And once that site is redeveloped, we would cease to exist.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Senator McCray?
Thank you, Madam Chair. My questions are similar to Senator Jackson's. I'm familiar with Marbidco, MCEC, but I wasn't familiar with Bainbridge Development Corporation. When are you all projected to finish the one project that you were established for?
That's a good question. So, without making the background too long, we were created in 1999 for the site to be transferred. The site was transferred as clean, and once initial phase of development went through the Maryland Department of the Environment Voluntary Cleanup Program, there was contamination found in the soil, which is very common for military installations. It was a very long process to have the site fully investigated, and then all parties come to an agreement on what a new redevelopment plan would look like. It was originally very heavy on residential. It's now much larger with commercial and industrial. We signed that agreement with the Department of the Navy in 2019, and we just transferred our first phase of development into private development the day before Thanksgiving of 2021. That's 440 acres. So we have about 680 acres that we still have to transfer into redevelopment, plus the Tome School historic structure. Realistically, from a full build-out with something of that size, it could be 5 to 10 years that would enable everything to be fully transferred into private development and also take into consideration the redevelopment of the historic Tome School.
And last question, Madam Chair. So, because the fiscal note just scratches at the surface of who you all are. Who's the stakeholders, who's the private donors you were referencing that actually fund your organization?
We have a development agreement with 3 different development entities. They go by MTPM LLC, but it is made up of Mannequin, H&S Properties, and NAI Michaels. Prior to the execution of that agreement, the BDC survived off of volunteer time and some various grants, but since that, our private development team has funded absolutely all of our operations, from legal and professional services to all of our staff time to property maintenance to environmental compliance to marketing. They fund all of the current expenses. Okay, thank you. I do have a question. Bainbridge has 2 employees, just for my own edification. Maryland Clean Energy Center, how many employees in Marbidco?
Right now, we have 6.
Okay, thank you.
Right now, we have 9. We're 10 at full strength.
Okay, wonderful. Any other questions? Seeing none, that concludes the hearing on this bill. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you,
Thank you.
Senator Feldman. Okay, and committee, there was a glitch with the testimony. So Kim is working on getting us physical packets for testimony. There was significant, about that big of testimony for this last bill, so we want to make sure you have it. One bill at a time. We're going to old school now. Okay. Next, we have Senate Bill 566, the State Retirement and Pension System Investment Climate Risk Fiduciary Duties. This is a joint committee bill. We'll have testimony after I give a brief from Haley Krim, Mike Tidwell, Mr. Novin, and Mr. Palmer. Okay. Colleagues, Senate Bill 5, this is what the gavel's for. Senate Bill 566 should be familiar to this committee. We heard it in the Joint Committee on Pensions over the fall, and we worked, a number of you worked over the interim in the summer and the fall on this issue. We know that Maryland is the 4th most vulnerable state to sea level rise and climate change. My own district experienced a tornado and a flood within a month of each other. One of the tools we have to ensure that we are not furthering that damage to climate change is our own investments. Senate Bill 566 would make Maryland the first in the nation to codify that climate risk is fiduciary risk to our pension system. I think it is a very light touch. It frankly codifies a lot of the practices the system's already implementing to ensure that our investments are both sustainable and carry that fiduciary obligation to return the highest amount of money to our state retirees. A couple details of the bill. It requires the system to consider the impacts of climate change on investment risks. It requires them to monitor net zero aligned investments and climate solutions in a long-term sustainable portfolio. To do this, again, already kind of existing board policy, it reviews investment portfolio to determine climate risk across industry sectors and sectors responsible for greenhouse gas emissions. It identifies investment opportunities in emerging renewable energy technologies in reducing carbon emitting technologies. It establishes a process for regular assessment of climate or potential climate risks. Again, this is, we think, a sustainable and responsible path forward for our pension system. And again, codifying already existing practices, utilizing, it expresses that we utilize direct engagement when necessary, proxy voting when necessary, and establishes a potential advisory panel of experts on climate change to regularly advise the pensions board on their investments. And lastly, it requires the chief investment officer to identify and strategically plan for more climate-friendly investment opportunities, and of course includes our annual reporting on these measures. Colleagues, it's my belief, and it was the Joint Committee's belief, that this is a very positive step forward, a responsible step forward in ensuring that our pension system is sustainable for generations to come. Seeing no questions. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry, Senator Arkard.
Of what might be considered, or could somebody share with me what are some of the issues, what are some of the examples of things that would be considered that fit into these broader categories identified on page 4?
On page 4. So I will tell you that we did not, it would not be responsible in my mind for us to identify particular companies or really even industry sectors, but
Just examples.
example, well, let me pull up the bill. Page 4, what line, Senator? And Andy Palmer's here as well. Andy, would you mind coming up?
Could somebody answer that for me?
It's the consequence of not having.
Maybe
physical
share,
bills.
since we're codifying existing practices, maybe you could just share generally what kinds of things are considered.
In terms of the assets that we might think about for transition,
Yes.
the opportunity side,
Sure,
is that what we're
thank you.
looking at? Sorry. I'm sure.
I think it's line 7, Andy.
Line 7? Broadly, the practices, I think what we're talking about is how are we protecting the system from climate change and the assets that we invest in from a negative perspective, and how do we look at the process of transition from a opportunity set perspective. And so looking at all the companies that are burning fossil fuels or producing fossil fuels and the impacts that they have, and the impact of regulation and reduced use of carbon on those businesses is one side of it. And the other side of it is all the things that are available for investment for on the transition, and that goes from things like investing in solar fields. But broadly, I would say there are sort of long-term themes that we see in the investment world. There was a globalization discussion a few years ago, how most companies were thinking, how do we use globalization to improve? There's been a technology wave where companies have been thinking about how do they use technology to expand their business. Over the next 2 decades, the transition is going to be a theme through every company. And so there are business opportunities that happen for companies to make those transitions. So we think that there are all kinds of ways that we can harness those opportunities to make money for the system. For example, we're looking at carbon capture as a potential field we can invest in and provide capital for carbon capture. There are opportunities in just businesses that happen to be not green today, but can be transformed into a more green form. And the people are looking at them and saying, well, if we transform these from a dirty diesel generating, burning company to a clean company, the marketplace is going to pay more for that. So people are looking at investments like that to say, okay, I'm going to buy something that's ugly today, and I'm going to transform it, and the market will reward us for it. So there's a lot of opportunities for us to do that, and we see it throughout the portfolio already, and we think it's just going to ramp up.
So you would be looking at various companies and practices to determine what would be the best return on the investment. So it wouldn't just be divesting of certain companies or businesses that we do
Correct.
business with now versus benefiting others. So
Yeah, and some of them are
broader.
the same businesses. So some of the very large oil and gas companies have develop strategies to transition to non-carbon companies over time, and they have cash flow coming from their current activities to fund it. And we think those are some of the leaders that we probably need to stay invested in, because they're going to be driving change in the industry over the next 2 decades. So we want to be invested in the companies that have strong plans and processes to transition, and perhaps, we either invest less in or invest nothing in, which is another word for divesting, and companies who are adamant that they're just not really interested in a transition or having any plan to protect their assets and the capital of the investors.
Thank you very much.
Senator-
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Just to, I think, bounce off of Andy's points, the bill provides for those tools that you already have, but certainly requires the system to think more officially about climate risk as that fiduciary risk. And to Andy's point, there are companies even here in Maryland that are transitioning from oil and gas to solar, wind, et cetera. Divesting from those companies would lose us an opportunity to make greater investments and frankly do a little good with our pension system. And so the bill provides for various tools: engagement, proxy voting, or divestment if that's what the board so chooses to do in that circumstance.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay. Mr. Palmer, if you wanted to testify further, you're welcome to stay. Yeah, so I have Ms. Krim, Mr. Tidwell, Mr. Novin, and Mr. Palmer.
Do you want to go first? Why don't you go first?
So, good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to testify on this bill. My name is Haley Krim, and I'm a climate researcher from Sandy Spring. I'm testifying in favor of Senate Bill 566 on behalf of 350 MoCo, a Montgomery County-based grassroots organization working for climate justice in our communities. We thank Senator Elfreth and Delegate Learman for their hard work on this legislation and for introducing this issue into the discussion. Focusing the pension on on climate risk is an important step for both protecting our retirees' financial future and making sure our state investments are helping to protect all of our futures from the existential risk of climate change. This bill is overdue, and the SRPS needs to use the tools that this bill gives them in order to rapidly decarbonize our pension assets. I'm able to offer you an important comparison from Montgomery County. A recent report shows that the state pension fund holds 162 of the 200 largest carbon-emitting companies in the world. Meanwhile, the Montgomery County Employee Retirement System pension holds only 25 of these same companies in its public equities portfolio. Even more importantly, the portfolio's overall holdings by weight, that is, the value that these companies hold in the portfolio, is less than a third of the SRPS's holdings. So it's clear that the SRPS has a long way to go before it catches up to the Montgomery County pension or to divested pension systems like those of Baltimore, Washington, D.C., New York City, New York State, and the state of Maine. These funds divested for both climate and financial stability and sustainability. For example, over 2 years ago, New York State announced divestment from 27 thermal coal companies because those companies could not show how they could manage climate risk. And last year, they divested from 7 tar sands companies for the same reason. It's past time for us to align our pension system with a safe and livable future and shed these money-losing investments. Passing this legislation is a start on making sure that we protect our pension investments from climate risk. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Krim. Mr. Tidwell.
Thank you very much. My name is Mike Tidwell. I'm Executive Director of the Chesapeake Climate Action Network, and I want to thank the bill sponsor, Senator Elfreth, for all the work that you've done, Senator, on this issue. I'm here just to add more evidence to the need that we need to focus on climate risk in the state pension funds, and we believe to ultimately divest from fossil fuels altogether. As has been mentioned, Washington, D.C., Baltimore City, New York State, Maine are on their way to divesting from fossil fuels, along with thousands of institutions worldwide. So we need to divest because fossil fuel investments are hurting our state retirees. It's hurting them in the pocketbook. I've submitted as part of my written testimony this press release. My organization recently commissioned and released a study by the prestigious researchers at FFI Solutions, and we asked them to investigate a simple question. Had the Maryland pension funds divested from fossil fuels 10 years ago, what would be the results today? And again, I've submitted this as written testimony. And what they found was, had we gotten out of fossil fuels because fossil fuels are underperforming, then the pension funds would have 15% more money in them today than they actually do. In other words, if you invested $1,000 in 2010 without fossil fuels, you'd have $1,000 plus $1,150. And what are those investments that are underperforming and hurting our teachers and other pensioners? They include information from a group called Carbon Underground 200. This is an organization that was formed simply to chart the highest, most intense fossil fuel companies or fossil fuel related companies in the world. There's 200 of them at the top. Maryland is invested in 162 of the 200 dirtiest fossil fuel companies in the world. Think about that. 162 of 200 according to Carbon Underground. And what do those companies do? They extract tar sands from Canada, the dirtiest form of fossil fuel in the world. We're invested in that. Coal companies, multiple coal companies. And the biggest investment of all is in ExxonMobil, which has done the least to address climate change and the most to actively confuse the public on it. So based on our own state climate policies, these fossil fuels have no future. Think about that. Our goal in this state as policy is to get off of fossil fuels almost entirely by the year 2024. We have a renewable portfolio standard that incentivizes wind and solar. We're moving toward electric cars. There is no future in fossil fuels, and we're still invested in them, and it's hurting our retirees. So with that, I will conclude by just saying, please pass SB 566. We believe it is a good start, a good step, but ultimately and soon we need to divest completely.
Thank you, Mr. Tidwell. Any questions? Thank you very much. Mr. Novin and Mr. Palmer? Mr. Novin.
Thank you, Chair Alfred, members of the committee. We just wanted to come and thank you for all of the Joint Committee's work and staff on this fantastic bill. It's a refined and thoughtful and impactful approach to addressing this very serious issue. So if you have any questions for us, we're happy to answer them. But we offered written testimony, and we're just here to make sure people understand how this bill actually accomplishes the types of issues that we've heard from some other folks testifying, and addresses these important issues.
Thank you. Mr. Palmer?
I just wanted to reiterate our conversation earlier, Senator Elfreth, with the focus on fiduciary responsibility, and to expand on that just a bit. One of the challenges as a state pension plan is we tend to follow ERISA, which is the federal regulation on pension plans, and the regulation around addressing topics like climate change has shifted from regime to regime to regime, and hasn't been clear that a fiduciary responsibility to address these was within the purview of the board. And so this bill clearly allows us to move forth, and if we need to spend money on consultants or staff or whatever, that we have the flexibility to do that and really address this and include this among the risks that we are include in our fiduciary responsibility today.
Thank you. I was going to ask you about certainty, and you went ahead and talked to us about it anyway, so thank you.
Okay.
Any questions for Mr. Novin or Mr. Palmer? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much. And sorry for the flurry of paper, committee, but we should have in front of you all the written testimony from Senate Bill 566. Okay. Senate Bill 727, Mr. Vice Chair. You may stay there or move.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This bill is really pretty simple and straightforward. It's also short. Basically, It deals with alternative investments, basically private equity funds, hedge funds, venture capital funds, et cetera, which are different from public equity. Our pension fund, like other pension funds, invests a material amount of the assets in these alternative investments. And all the bill says is that the fees charged by the managers of these funds need to be disclosed to the public. The pension fund staff already has the information. Obviously, they wouldn't be investing in funds if they didn't know what they're being charged, just like if you buy bananas at the grocery store, you want to know what the cost is. But currently, they're not disclosing those charges to the public. Obviously, this is a public pension fund, public employees. These kinds of investments have higher fees than most other investments. They have higher fees for good reasons because in many ways they're more complex, they're more focused, they're more complicated. There's nothing wrong with having higher fees. But it's in the interest of investors, it's in the interest of the economy to have as much transparency about fees as possible because that drives down fees. And every dollar that is not paid to the managers can go to the beneficiaries. And so we want managers to be paid a fair return on their work, but I think we also want to make sure that the public has an understanding, the beneficiaries in our plan have an understanding of what those fees are on all the investments. In publicly traded investments, those are disclosed. They ought to be disclosed as well in these private equity funds. So that's what the bill does, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Senator Rosapep. Any questions for Senator Rosapep? Okay, I have a number of folks signed up to testify. Mr. Lucci, Mr. Baker, Mr. Noble.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the Pension Subcommittee. Thank you for being so bright and cheerful at 8:30 in the morning. I'm Len Lucci. I'm here on behalf of the Impact Project. Thank you, Senator Rosapep, for sponsoring this bill. I do want to note that they have written testimony from the Maryland State Education Association and AFSCME supporting this bill, and of course, they are the major stakeholders in the State Retirement Agency. I have two gentlemen I would like to introduce to you who flew in last night from the Midwest, but don't blame them for the colder weather. First Mr. Chris Noble from the Private Equity Stakeholder Project, and also Mr. Jim Baker from the Private Equity Stakeholder Project. Chris will describe the bill. Jim will talk about some of the statements made in the fiscal note and by the Retirement Agency and address that and give you comfort on that as well. So with your permission, I would turn it over to Chris Noble at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Len. Good morning, Chair Elfrith and members of the subcommittee. My name is Chris Noble, Policy Coordinator for the Private Equity Stakeholder Project. We are a nonprofit watchdog organization focused on the impacts of private equity firms, hedge funds, and similar Wall Street firms on workers and communities. And I am an attorney and have previously worked with other state pension systems on investment agreements with private equity firms. I wish to speak in support of Senate Bill 727, which would provide greater transparency into the hundreds of millions of dollars in fees that private equity firms, hedge funds, and other alternative asset managers charge to the Maryland State Retirement and Pension System every year, and the investment performance of the investment managers that receive those fees. This bill builds on 2019 legislation that required the Maryland State Retirement System to disclose carried interest or incentive fees that it pays to private equity firms and hedge funds. Private equity firms and other alternative asset managers charge investors like the system fees in a few different ways. Annual management fees, carried interest or performance fees, fees and expenses charged to the fund, and fees they collect indirectly from the portfolio companies they own on behalf of investors like SRPS. It is currently impossible to get a full picture of how much the system is actually paying in fees to private equity firms and hedge funds and other asset managers in a given year. Alternative investments accounted for almost half of SRPS's portfolio as of June 30, 2021. Yet unlike its public equity and fixed income investment managers, the system only reports fees and performance paid to private equity and hedge fund managers in the aggregate and not on a fund-by-fund basis. SRPS reports aggregate carried interest on a calendar year basis, while it reports all other fees paid on a fiscal year basis, making it hard to get a full picture of how much the system is paying in fees to alternative asset managers in a given year. Further, SRPS does not appear to count fees charged by private equity or hedge fund managers to portfolio companies, or fees and expenses associated with fund formation that are charged to the private equity or hedge fund, even though it ultimately bears the cost of them. The system also does not report performance or for individual alternative asset managers, so there is no easy way to compare the fees a manager charges to their fund performance to understand whether those fees are merited. This bill would provide greater transparency into the hundreds of millions of dollars in fees that private equity, hedge fund, and other alternative investment managers charge to the state retirement and pension system. Thank you.
Please.
Good morning, Chair Elfreth, members of the subcommittee. My name is Jim Baker. I'm the Executive Director of the Private Equity Stakeholder Project. Also wish to speak in support of Senate Bill 727. The bill is modeled on a 2016 California law, Assembly Bill 2833, that required greater disclosure of alternative asset manager fees and performance. That law has been in effect for 5 years now, and under it, dozens of state and local pension systems, many of them much smaller than the Maryland State Retirement and Pension System, report the fees they pay to and investment performance of their private equity, hedge fund, and other alternative asset managers on at least an annual basis. In addition, several other state and local pension systems around the country, including the Missouri State Employees Retirement System, the Pennsylvania Public School Employees Retirement System, the Employees Retirement System of Rhode Island, report fees that individual alternative asset managers charge, including management fees, carried interest, and other fees. Disclosing fees and investment performance has had little or no impact on these pension systems' ability to invest with private equity or hedge fund managers. Indeed, these systems are invested with many of the same private equity and hedge fund managers as the Maryland pension system is. You know, for example, Institutional Venture Partners, New Mountain Partners, Madison Dearborn Capital. You know, Maryland invested with them, so have these other places that disclose fees. If they can disclose fees in other places, why not in Maryland? It is unclear why the SRPS is so far behind so many of its peers in reporting the fees it pays to private equity and hedge fund managers and the investment performance of those managers. Last year, SRPS's hedge fund or absolute return investments substantially underperformed public equity or stock investments, yet charged fees that were 4 times as high. And that doesn't include carried interest or additional fees. Some of the SRPS's investment managers likely substantially underperformed, but there's no easy way to know since the SRPS does not disclose performance on a fund-by-fund basis. It's time for private equity and hedge fund managers to stop hiding the hundreds of millions of dollars in fees that they charge the state of Maryland each year. I can't think of another state contract where the contractor refuses to disclose how much they're charging the state. Senate Bill 727 would provide important transparency that would benefit Maryland retirees, employees, and taxpayers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. Any questions? We have your written testimony. You read a list of other pension systems that already do disclose, and that's in your written testimony?
It is.
Okay, thank you. Okay, seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, I have Mr. Novin and Mr. Palmer.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'd just like to say a few words about this bill. I know that we provided written testimony, and we certainly want to continue to have a conversation about fees and disclosure. First, we do disclose all of the fees, and we do so in the aggregate where it can be measured as an asset class and in our overall performance. And the reason why we're able to do that is because we successfully negotiate with our limited partnership agreements to gain that ability to disclose this information to the public because it's important. It's reconciled, all these fees. It's audited. The reason why we do so on the calendar year basis is because then we can have audited real numbers that provide more meaningful information. And that's important. And there's 2 ways that doing more than that, we push it as far as we can with our managers. There's 2 things we want to do with private equity. One, we want to get the lowest fees we can.
and we negotiate lower fees because we don't disclose to the other limited partners that we've been able to get lower fees than they have. We're not going to be able to get lower fees from our private equity managers if we have to if they have to give those same lower fees to every other investor. So that's one way this would be a very costly idea and provide very limited benefit in terms of the greater granularity in terms of fee disclosure. The other thing is the top quartile managers vastly outperform the rest of the marketplace when it comes to private equity. So if we cannot get into those oversubscribed funds, the funds that everyone's trying to get into because we have these unique requirements, we are not an outlier when it comes to private equity. The outlier are the 2 or 3 other funds out there that are handcuffed in the marketplace and unable to access the top quartile funds and unable to negotiate the best fees for their members and their pension funds. There has not been enough experience to quantify exactly how much this has cost the other few systems that have these handcuffs in the marketplace. But in a few years, when these plans mature and when you can see the results and the impact of them not being able to access these funds, we'll be able to actually quantify how many billions of dollars it costs these other funds. We're concerned about this. We are looking forward to talking to the proponents of this legislation and educating them and letting them know what we actually do. I understand that it's unclear if they haven't talked to us yet, so we're going to actually be able to start those conversations today. And if there are specific things that the proponents are very interested in, we may be able to find a way to give them meaningful information in a way that doesn't impact our ability to do our jobs. For example, we could show funds as opposed to giving the names of providers. We could do it by, some states do this, they do Fund A, Fund B, Fund C, and they disclose fees. So you can still have a robust public debate about how a certain fund is doing and why we're still invested in it without violating the agreement we have with the provider and limit our ability to access the top tier providers, or having to put them in a fund of funds where you have to pay another layer of fees on top of that to be able to access the fund without having to disclose the information. So there's some practical realities. We don't want to spend billions of dollars in terms of not having those earnings coming into the system, so it'd be billions of dollars you'd have to come up with for more granular disclosure, but we're more than willing and open to the idea of figuring out what are we really trying to accomplish here? What's the motivation behind the proposal? And then what can we do to give meaningful information, without impacting our ability to do our jobs? So that's how we feel about the bill. Andy Palmer's here to answer detailed questions as well.
Okay. Senator Roosevelt.
Thank you. It sounds to me from what you say, you have no evidence this will hurt the pension fund. You're saying that other states have done this and you have no idea whether it's hurt them.
No, we do. So the evidence we have is we know fund of funds are more expensive than going direct.
I'm not talking about a fund of funds.
And we
I'm talking about the
understand there's
disclosure
fund of fund
requirements.
fees. Yes?
I'm talking about the disclosure requirements in California and the other states.
Right. So the disclosure requirements are pushing those other states and would push us to use fund of funds more often. Fund of funds are more expensive. Every dollar you're paying to a fund of fund provider to access a fund you can no longer access directly is a dollar that is not going into the pension system. Those are expensive fees.
Do you have any data on that?
Yes, we can get you data on that. We can get you data on that. We can get you data on how much it would cost the system if we can no longer
I'm not
access the top
asking
quartile.
speculative stuff. I'm talking about data.
So
You have data showing that California has lost X amount of money because they have moved out of funds where they have to disclose the fees into other funds? You have that?
Senator, we can't tell that yet because the bill is only a few years old.
That's what I thought.
But I can tell you that we spoke directly with 4 California plans in the last week or so.
Yeah.
And asked them about their experience.
Yeah.
And they reported that they have had private equity funds tell them that they will not partner with California because of this bill.
Have they identified which those funds are?
No, they haven't identified.
Shouldn't they under the law in California?
I don't know.
Well, maybe we ought to have an amendment to this bill to make clear that if somebody refuses to do business because of transparency, that they be identified as well. Would that be helpful?
I'm not sure that would be helpful because that would make it, we wouldn't even be able to engage with them.
Well, you could engage with them. I mean, fundamentally, this is a restraint of trade. I mean, fundamentally, this is people with market power taking advantage of their market power to hurt pension funds and pension retirees.
So let me, if I can back up just a second
Sure.
and talk about, there's an implication that it's fees upon fees upon fees upon fees. And it's really not, because the the manager charges a base fee, and then the partnership, we're part of a partnership, and the partnership has expenses, and then the partners share in the profits of that enterprise. So at the end, the fees and any expenses or inter-party payments are netted out of the profit before the private equity fund gets any carry. So it has to, the pension plan earns generally an 8% preferred return, plus all of its fees back, plus any expenses, and then the private equity firm starts accumulating carry. And we've had discussions in here about another bill that has talked about how that carry is treated, and right now under federal law, that's treated as capital gains. So those private equity fund managers are very astute, and they want to push as much profit as they can into that capital gains treatment. So there really be, if we have manager by manager returns, which we do provide for every asset, every manager, we provide the fund we're in, how much we've given them, and what the return is for every manager, and that's available.
So
and
what?
we have the fees.
I don't understand the significance of what you're saying. What's your point? I mean, I know how they work.
My point is that the private equity managers are not ladling on extra fees to enrich themselves because it costs them money to do it in the way that is implied by the focus on the intercompany fees and expenses within the funds.
Okay, well, on that one, I'll respectfully disagree with you. I've invested in private equity funds. I've served on the boards of private equity funds. And in fact, there are multiple ways, as you described, that folks get compensated. And there's some short-term benefits and some long-term benefits. Yes, folks want the capital gains, they want the carried interest, I agree with all that. But they also want the money in the short run. Because you're right, that it's like in any area, that there's a small number of managers who are better than others, but they're not perfect all the time. And sometimes people have a good fund and sometimes they have a bad fund. And so they want to get money both in the short run in case they don't get the big hit at the end with the carried interest. Because a lot of the return, as you know, in private equity, as it is in the public markets, is related to the business cycle. It's not all, they're so smart that they make a lot of money when everybody else is losing money. They are less correlated, obviously, with the public markets. But it's a big impact. It's what happens to the general economy, what happens to their sectors. So the idea that they have no incentive to maximize all of their fees just seems to me like contrary to common sense.
Senator?
And if that's true, why shouldn't you disclose it anyway?
Senator?
Yes, please.
This is an important conversation.
Yeah.
I think transparency is a goal every one of us share. But I would encourage us to have this conversation because it sounds like more back and forth is needed and we still have 2 more bills to
That's
hear
fine.
and 4
fine.
bills to vote on.
No problem. Thank you, madam.
And I want to thank the system for being willing to have those conversations today. Senator Jackson.
I'll be very quick. Mr. Novin, you mentioned that you'd be more than willing to share information with the membership. I think part of the transparency concerns are having served on the Prince George's County Board of Trustees for 13 and a half years or so. Sometimes we don't know what we don't know. So I would be, I think this committee would be very much interested in how you would be willing to have those conversations. So look forward to speaking to you more.
So of course, happy to explore this and happy to do as much as we can. Frankly, we work very hard to disclose as much as we can and to get authority to do so, and we'll continue to do so. But the more we know what you'd like to see, the easier it is for us to focus on the types of disclosure that you'd find most helpful.
Okay. I think this is the start of a wonderful conversation and I want to appreciate everybody for the discussion. Okay. Being no further questions, we will move on to Senate Bill 727. That was it, Senate Bill 739. I apologize, thank you. I'm going to call Ann Gothrop. This is another joint committee bill brought to us by the system by request. Ms. Gothrop, take it away.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. This Bill 739, it addresses 2 investment division compensation issues that were brought up in the 2018 legislation that, if you recall, that was the bill that gave the board independent salary setting authority for the investment division subject to certain constraints. One of those constraints was that it capped any increases for the staff to 10% annually. And the discussion with that was, well, the existing staff, what I refer to the pre-2018 group, the ones that were there before the bill passed, what it did is they were so far behind the national midpoint of comparable peers and comparable public pension plans that I think you all were thinking, well, the 10% a year, that'll fast track them to where they need to be. And the ones that would be coming in after 18, well, they wouldn't be a problem because they'd already be hired where they needed to be. The problem is that these pre-2018 people are so far behind the midpoint that 4 years later, they're continuing to lag. And as more and more new people are hired at where they should be, they are lagging behind considerably. Their salaries are significantly less than their peers that they work side by side with. And it's not just with peers. Our deputy CIO, who's been there over 20 years, he supervises our managing directors. He is making significantly less than a managing director that was just hired because these 10% increases are not getting them to where they need to be fast enough. We're worried morale issues are going to start. People could leave, which is exactly what you tried to avoid, which is why you passed the 2018 legislation, which was to keep retention there. So what 739 does is, in part, one of the things it does is it says, hey, the board will have the authority to make 2 salary adjustments over a 2-year period, which will bring this discrete group, there's 9 of them, it will bring them up to the midpoint so everyone is where they should be in the system, in the investment division. The second part of 739 is that it addresses the forfeiture provisions that were in the 2018 legislation with regard to incentive compensation. The 2018 legislation said if the CIO or the investment division staff leave for any reason, they forfeit any incentive comp that's still on the table that they haven't received. 739 says, it makes an exception for retirements. And it says, if you retire, if the staff retires directly from the division and within 30 days of leaving the division, so they can't leave and then come back and retire 5 years later. You have to retire within 30 days of leaving. You get any incentive comp you still have on the table. And one other thing I want to point out is that the Objective Criteria Committee that was also created in the 2018 legislation, and it was charged with making recommendations to the board for compensation purposes. This is one of the things, these are the 2 issues that they pointed out at the time, and I believe it was Senator Serafini who said these are going to be issues that are going to have to be addressed in the future, and here we are. So thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Gothrop. I do have one question. We're hearing in this committee certainly staffing issues across the board, across state government. Are you experiencing those same staffing issues in the employee market we're experiencing now? And if so, this bill would certainly help you retain.
I don't know that Andy's division is experiencing the staffing issues that the rest of the agency is. I know the rest of the agency is experiencing serious staffing issues. I think, I don't know, Andy, are you experiencing staffing issues? I don't. Just yes or no?
We haven't had any departures yet, but we are finding the pool of applicants that are coming to open positions is shrinking, which is a sign that we're having some staffing issues. We had one where we just failed. We had just a few candidates, and they took other jobs.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
And certainly if you would want to expand this to the rest of the agency.
I'm sure. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. And Anne, you were the only one I had signed up. Mr. Palmer, Mr. Novin are here as well for any questions from the committee. Seeing none, that concludes the hearing. Thank you, Anne. Last but certainly not least, Senate Bill 822, Law Enforcement Officers Pension System Membership 911 Specialist. Senator Carrozza, thank you for your patience in waiting today.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the Senate Budget Taxation Committee. For the record, Senator Mary Beth Carrozza, District 38, Worcester, Wycomico, and Somerset. And hearing your earlier bills, it was reminding me of the complexity of pension issues back to our days on appropriations with Senator Jackson. This morning, I present to you Senate Bill 822, Law Enforcement Officers Pension Systems Membership 911 Specialists. This enabling legislation would provide local jurisdictions with the option to allow sworn 911 specialists to qualify for LEOPS. And let me give you the background if I could. The need for the bill was brought to my attention by both local law enforcement and 911 specialists as a way to retain these valuable public safety employees. As Fruitland Police Chief Brian Swafford and other law enforcement leadership have shared with me, quote, "Our 911 dispatchers and operators endure many of the same stresses as our officers, and they are the first point of contact for the public during critical incidents and emergencies. Additionally, our specialists are an absolute lifeline for our police, fire, and EMS personnel. Currently, our specialists are not eligible for LEOPS retirement. As this committee knows, eligibility for LEOPS ranges from several areas of law enforcement personnel, including natural resource officers, health police officers with the Maryland Department of Health, Motor Vehicle Administration officers, members of the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services, Intelligence and Investigative Division, paramedics, and firefighters. Our 911 personnel are very essential as our first responders, and I believe that we should give local jurisdiction an option to include 911 specialists. As you will hear, the Maryland Association of Counties supports SB 822 to give local jurisdictions this option for their 911 specialists, but would like the bill amended to include civilian 911 specialists, which are the vast majority of the specialists across the state. This has been a difficult process with the complexities of this, and during this process, I want to thank Ann Gothrop and I want to thank Kevin Kenley from MACO on trying to work through what the possible options might be that this committee could consider to strengthen the retirement of 911 specialists as a way to recruit and retain these key public safety employees. For those 911 specialists who are in the employee and teachers retirement system and who are eligible to retire after 30 years, we discussed the possibility of reducing the number of years of retirement for 911 specialists to 25 years, which would be consistent with the LEOPS retirement eligibility. And this committee, with its wisdom and experience on these issues, may know of other retirement options or incentives that you may want to consider to increase incentives targeted specifically to civilian 911 employees. I'm trying to be clear that my bill as written covers sworn 911 specialists. I believe that this bill as written now is a good first step to give local jurisdiction an option for the sworn 911 specialists to be eligible for LEOPS. And I would appreciate the opportunity to work with this committee and with the state retirement system on expanding the bill to cover the majority of our 911 specialists, whether it's through MACO's amendment or other options that could be provided by the state retirement system. I truly believe that we have an obligation to take action now to retain our 911 specialists who are an absolute lifeline to public safety. And so I really respectfully bring this before you. A lot of thought and consideration has been made just to come to this point. It is a very narrow bill as written. I believe it's a good first step, and I would ask for your favorable consideration.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Jackson.
And I also have the experts here who can also fill in, because I'm the first to say I'm not an expert on these systems.
Senator.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Senator Carrozza. And first of all, I look forward to working with you on this. I am, in my real-life job, I am the Deputy Director for Office of Homeland Security in Prince George's County. We have over 200 911 employees there. We also handle emergency management for the county. Former labor leader, former sheriff of my county. I understand these matters. But I do have a few challenges with the legislation. Sworn law enforcement officers already are probably eligible for LEOPS, or there is locally they could probably join in the LEOPS. I know some agencies use sworn law enforcement, sometimes the state police does for the 911 piece, but I think the selection of pension systems is solely up to them and the local jurisdiction. When you're talking about civilians jumping into the LEOP system, I have a concern. Love to work with you on finding an alternative. I served, Madam Chair, for 4 years on the 911 Commission, and the classification of 911 specialists came out of that, and we are working diligently. As a matter of fact, the chair of classification is my colleague, a deputy director at Homeland Security who oversees 911. So I would love to work with you on what we do for the civilian 911 specialists and their retirement system, and with Ms. Gothrop and others. So, I'm not inclined to support this particular piece of legislation, but I think there's some legislation in the future we could work on.
So, Senator Jackson, first of all, I respect your leadership in this area and your deep experience with it. The reason I thought it was a limited good step is my understanding, and maybe this can be clarified and worked through, is that even those, I wanted to ensure that I thought we needed a designation for those 911 specialists to still be covered, even if they are sworn. If that's not the case, my understanding, we would need that legislatively. As far as how we go to the next step, I think it would be important, to have some type of legislative vehicle here, just to show that we're moving towards some type of, looking at some type of incentives, working with the state retirement system for the 911 civilian specialists. So I will take you up on your offer to work through it this session.
Absolutely, and lastly, and I'll stop here. Ms. Gothrop, my understanding, if I am a sworn law enforcement officer, and agencies have done this because of manpower shortage, where they'll place someone in a 911 center and they'll get them trained up to that step, but the retirement system that law enforcement officer who's classified, those folks will choose or be in the pension system of that law enforcement agency or that entity versus the civilian side. I'm not sure.
So
Go ahead.
the 911 specialists are all local employees, so their employer, the county themselves that employ those individuals, they right now are civilians. So if their county chooses to participate in the plan, they have to go into the employee's pension system.
Exactly.
They don't, LEOPS is not an option for them, which is why Senator Carrozza's bill is drafted the way it is to make it clear that if you want them in LEOPS, they have to be sworn officers.
Gotcha.
But if they were sworn officers, if our tax council is okay with that language and this bill were to move forward, then the locals, the county would have the choice, well, we want to join LEOPS and we're going to put we have law enforcement in LEOPS, in the employees' pension system.
Absolutely.
If their local government chooses to go into that plan versus the LEOPS plan. The employees' plan is cheaper, which is why some of them choose to go that way.
Gotcha. Thanks for the clarification.
Thank you, Senator. And knowing that we do have to vote this morning as well, just one question. This came from the 911 Commission, Senator, this recommendation?
This, as I said, this recommendation came from the local law enforcement and from working with MACO and others.
Gotcha.
And we have 30 seconds
Yes,
for
of
my
course,
MACO
Mr.
rep? Okay.
Yeah. Mr. Finale?
Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. I'm not here to give Senator Jackson any more heartburn this morning. Senator Carrozza brought us this bill. Look, we're all about supporting our 911 specialists. We've done a lot of great work over the years, and so we wanted to make sure that if we were going to enhance a benefit for some, it would be for all. So we understand LEOPS may not be the right venue here, but certainly willing to work with this committee, with the sponsor of this legislation, and we thank her for bringing it to come up with a solution that benefits everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Canale. Any questions? Okay. Senator, the chair is putting together, I believe, a work group on all public safety related tax credits and retirement benefits. So I'm going to ask that we include this bill for consideration in that work group and maybe work out some of the details, if that's okay. Okay, thank you. All right, that concludes the hearings we have today. And while we are due on the floor in 17 minutes, I would like to see if we can't get a couple bills out. I'm going to start with, because we just heard these two, the middle of the pack, Senate Bill 566, State Retirement and Pension System Investment Climate Risk Fiduciary Duties. Again, this is a joint committee bill that was recommended by the joint committee in the fall. Philip?
Jane.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, this, the joint committee bill, this deals with, establishes consideration of climate risk factors and as a fiduciary obligation of the system as testified during the hearing. This would provide the clarity for the system and insulate against any of the flux that's happened at the federal level by establishing our own standard. This is, as discussed at the joint committee, becoming an emerging, and it's generally considered a fiduciary obligation, which is why the system is already doing a lot of this. So this codifies that we continue that. In addition to the codification of the fiduciary standard, there's also provisions in here looking not just about risk in terms of a detriment, but risk in terms of opportunity to the fund, as the CIO mentioned, in terms of finding opportunities for investment gains in transitions to a low carbon economy or other replacement and renewable technologies for energy, and across the entire portfolio.
Senator Eckert.
Thank you very much. I get very nervous when we start talking about divestment. So, and I will vote for this today, because it does not state that. I think it is important that we assess both the positive aspects and the downside, but we have to keep our eyes open, have that kind of assessment, so I appreciate that, but I am nervous about divestment.
The aim of the bill is
Thank you.
Is to provide the full toolbox. Divestment is one piece of it. This looks at the whole issue through an investment lens, rather than picking something based on a criteria. And choosing the system can already divest. It's still an option, but it'll be based on a financial evaluation.
And is not, in my view, the General Assembly directing them to divest or to make certain investment decisions, just view those investment decisions through a more responsible and sustainable lens. And I'd like to thank Senator Rosapep in the Joint Committee in the fall, making a very good point that this is also a market signal for us as well as an engagement opportunity. Any other questions or comments about Senate Bill 566? Thank you. All right, all those in favor? Any opposed? Looks like we have unanimous, thank you. Next, Senate Bill 739, State Retirement and Pension System Investment Division Compensation. Okay, all those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Thank you, Anne. Moving up to Senate Bill 402, Employees Retirement and Pension System Reemployment Earnings Limitation COVID-19 Exemption. This came to us from the governor's office. We heard it 2 weeks ago. I know Philip is working on a clarifying amendment that we might only have in concept today.
Correct. So what the bill does is it provides an exemption from the reemployment offset reduction for certain reemployed retirees working on COVID response matters. So there's two pieces. One is related to employees coming back to the Department of Health. Another one is related to employees coming back to Department of Labor. These provisions were in last year's BRFA. It's reauthorizing it, extending it for another year through calendar 22. The amendment in the testimony was related to Department of Health. There was, I think, one or two other employees that the way the bill is worded did not necessarily cover. So one change that's been proposed on the bill at page 16 page 1, line 16, rather than previously employed by the Department of Health, previously employed by the state. And then I'm working with Department of Health on refining some of the language to clarify that the tasks and job functions being performed while reemployed are accurately reflected and narrowly tailored, so that we're encompassing everybody without creating a too broad exemption.
The bill is written says other duties, is that correct?
The proposal was other duties, and that there's concern that that is too vague, that anybody who's a reemployed retiree with the MDH could argue that, they're subject to the exemption. So I'm working with MDH to refine kind of what exactly the job duties were.
So committee, I'm comfortable voting that amendment in concept because I think it reflects generally we'd like to be specific in this type of bill. All those in favor? Any opposed? Okay, thank you. And last of the day, Senate Bill 458, Maryland Teachers and State Employees Supplemental Retirement Plans, Use of Minority Business Enterprises from Senator Griffith, and we do have an amendment that should be on your desks.
Yes, so this bill kind of updates and clarifies the MBE reporting requirements related to the supplemental retirement plan. The language that's currently in code references, I think, investment services and brokerage, which is not, brokerage and investment management, which is not really what supplemental plans is engaged in. So the testimony at the hearing was the reporting has kind of been not applicable or zeros on amounts. So the bill updates the services to investment and fund manager services to reflect what supplemental plans is actually doing, so that the MBA reporting aligns with the practice. And then the amendment you have was suggested by Department of General Services. So on page 2, down at the bottom, there's reference to using the supplemental plans website and Office of State Procurement website. This would add in also the state's electronic procurement system.
Senator Griffith?
Yes, thank you, and thank you, Philip. Basically, the amendment that DGS wanted is just that we not specifically name the electronic system, but that we keep it general in case the name changes. So I'd move favorable on the amendments.
Okay, all those in favor of the amendments? Aye. Okay. Is
Move
there a
the
motion?
bill as amended.
All those in favor? All right. Looks like we have 4 for 4 this morning. I want to thank the committee. I hope everybody has a minute before floor to grab a bite to eat. We are next in this room on March 10th, a time TBD, depending on how many bills we have before us. And with that, we're adjourned.